Hi, Jacqueline Timmer here, founder and director of the American Voters Alliance, formerly known as Got Freedom, and host of the Main Street podcast. I am here in the Main Street studio, and as many of you know, we have temporarily put production on hold due to a number of other projects that the team and I are working on. However, in our regularly scheduled slot with USLA, coming up right now, we are filling that place with my dad's podcast, First Principles. My father is former Kansas Attorney General Phil Klein. He is a law professor at Liberty University and director of the Amistad Project. So I'm sure that you will enjoy his podcast. Sometimes I co-host with him as well. So we'll be bringing that to you while we wrap up some of the projects on the AVA and Main Street side, and we'll be back with you shortly. So enjoy First Principles.
Hi, this is Phil Klein. Welcome back to First Principles. And you know, for some time I've been saying that freedom is not complicated, but we're making it so. But now I'm beginning to wonder whether we are free at all. Today, I have the opportunity to interview Michael Patrick Leahy. Michael is a graduate of Harvard University, Stanford University, and started out in marketing and then became a prolific writer. He has written several books, The Radical Conservative's Guide. He's written books about the Tea Party. He additionally is a journalist that contributes often to Breitbart News, and he's the CEO of the Star News Network. And I've had the opportunity of working with Michael, and it's so enjoyable to get a journalist who is focused on finding the truth and is disciplined and willing to dig for it, because unfortunately we live at a time when many of those elected officials, those in office, do all they can to prevent us from understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it. Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Phil, it's great to be with you, and a salute to you for all the great work that you've done in the election integrity arena.
Well, I appreciate it, Mike. I want to go back. We're the same generation, and you broke into journalism about what year was it?
You know, I think probably about 2008, 2009. At that time, I was one of the early organizers of the Tea Party movement. I put together on Twitter, Twitter actually was not as awful as it is today back in 2008, but a couple weeks after the election of Barack Obama and their dominance of the left of social media, I thought, well, there must be some conservatives on social media. So I put a little site up called Top Conservatives on Twitter. And I started ranking conservatives based upon the number of followers. It turned out that there were a lot of conservatives, and they were both competitive and lonely.
Let me ask you, because that takes some time to do that, and it's not an immediate revenue generator, if it ever is.
Oh, it wasn't a revenue generator at all.
Where's your passion? Where's your passion come from for that?
Well, it was people were really worried about the future of the country because Barack Obama had a far left agenda. Everybody knows that. We're seeing it now. And his former vice president going off even further in a socialist agenda with the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I call him the legal but not legitimate president of the United States, Joe Biden. And we can talk about why I think that's an accurate description of it. But it wasn't that hard to put it together. I will say that there was a 24-hour period when I got bombarded with like 2,500 people that wanted to get on this list. I crowdsourced a database guy who automated it, and it was terrific. And we created a hashtag called TCOT, hashtag TCOT, which for a couple of years was sort of the dominant conservative hashtag on Twitter. And we used it to organize regular weekly calls of activists. Many people who you recognize today, I first got to know them by those calls. Jenny Beth Martin, founder of Tea Party Patriots. Dana Lash, the radio talk show host, who at that time had like a Sunday evening program on a radio station in St. Louis. Mark Meckler, was on that early calls.
Well, you're
And
kind of
when
in the new populism Hall of Fame then, as well as the left's probably Hall of Shame. Now, Mike, when back in the 80s, let's go back to the 80s, the Ronald Reagan years, the Cold War, the Soviet Union, and when I dealt with journalists then, I was frustrated because they generally did a he said, she said report to appear objective, and they were pretty much lazy. Now I'm dealing with local journalists, not national necessarily, but at least they would let both sides air it out. We're seeing a whole new mission for journalism. They're actually admitting that they don't believe their role is to even attempt to be objective, but it's to push a narrative. Tell me what you think about the evolution.
I think you're exactly right. And a lot of it has to do, there's several elements to it. First, we've noticed schools of journalism have transformed from just reporting the facts to being advocates of issues, right? We saw NPR just last month make an announcement that it's okay for their journalists to also be activists. Well, that's incompatible with the concept of objectivity. They've become much more brazen. Part of it has to do with the fact that in media, there's been a huge number of changes since the 1980s. The rise of the internet is number one, the consolidation of power, the consolidation of media companies, the virtual elimination of many local newspapers, the movement of advertisers, of local advertisers, away from advertising in hard copy newspapers and to some extent online local news sites to Google or Facebook, et cetera. And Google, Facebook, and Twitter are ideologically left wing, and they don't support the First Amendment, and they don't support classic American concepts. They are, I would say, properly to say, they are profit maximizing oligopolist nationalists. How about that?
Yeah, and we're bordering on having a corporate oligarchy in America. I was reading, and forgive me, I can't remember the agency. I don't know if it was the Election Assistance Commission or if it was Homeland Security, but it was an 8-page paper. I was just reading it this week on the vulnerabilities of our digital systems in elections. And you and I have talked about this before. I have not seen proof that we were hacked from without. I firmly believe we were hacked from within. It's the nonprofit shadow government dictating the way the election would be run. And this time they ran it in the urban core as a campaign office for Biden. They put the money there and they did GOTV or voter turnout, and they targeted potential Biden voters. And I believe that's contrary to law. But going back to this paper, our machines are vulnerable and they can be connected to the internet, although we haven't seen proof that they were manipulated this election. This has been known for some time. But the entirety of the focus of the paper as it relates to digital threat is stopping what they called hate speech and also deplatforming those who they believe gave misinformation. Now, I'm sorry. As I went through the legislature, I had a lot of journalists that I believe were lying about me, but I would have never created a government truth bureau, nor believed that the government should have the jurisdiction to define what's misinformation and what is not. That's Pravda. That's the KGB from our age. What are your thoughts about that? Government actually focusing their spooks, so to speak, on watching what Americans say and then trying to prevent it from being said to others.
Yeah, and there is, I think, if I can elaborate on that, Phil, I think there's an unholy alliance between the big tech social media giants, Facebook, Google, Twitter, mainstream media outlets, NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, that crowd, and the federal government and the bureaucracy within the federal government. Because we saw the term has been the deep state, but lifelong bureaucrats who work for the national federal government, we saw numerous instances of them contravening the direct orders of the commander-in-chief under the Trump administration. Now they are all aligned kind of on one game plan, aren't they? And It is very dangerous for those of us who are simply trying to produce the truth and report on it. Now, when we report at the Star News Network, and as you know, we started the Star News Network back in February of 2017. I started the Tennessee Star, where I live. I live in Nashville. I do a radio program in the morning from 5 a.m. to 8 on the iHeart station here in Nashville. But we have grown from the Tennessee Star, which I think gets about 1 million users a month, and growing rapidly. We have now 7 other states, about to be 8 other states, and we're just putting the truth out. And it's very interesting to see what gets picked up by other media outlets and what doesn't get picked up. Let me give you an example of a very important story that is right in your bailiwick about election integrity that has gotten very, very little traction in the media. But also, we've seen a lot of Republican politicians that haven't really paid attention to this. And I think it is as close to a smoking gun about the questionable campaign contributions or questionable donations made by Mark Zuckerberg individually and his wife, Priscilla Chan, in the 2020 general election. And as you know, Zuckerberg and his wife gave $419 million to 2 nonprofit groups. One of them, the Center for Technology and Civic Life, got $350 million, and they focus mainly on election administration at the state and county level. That's an area that you worked on extensively. The other group, called the Center for Election Innovation and Research, I love that name, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Got $69 million,
and that's Mike. I'm sorry, that's just Zuckerberg's money. That doesn't include the other monies they got. Yes.
Yeah. We're just looking at the Zuckerberg side, individual money. They got $69 million, Phil, in 2020, and they used it in 23 states. And the idea that they had was for the Secretary of State in that state to promote voting activity in, they claimed this was in the pandemic era, and how to vote safely by mail, et cetera.
How to vote safely.
Yeah.
Don't stab yourself with a pen.
I know. Yeah, really. Don't stab yourself with that pen. It's very dangerous. But we did some research into that, and it turns out, Phil, as you've seen the story, in Michigan, it was the only state where that Center for Election in Innovation and Research money did not go to the Secretary of State. Now, if it goes to the Secretary of State, it's discoverable how it was spent.
Right.
It went to a shell 501c3 organization that had been around for about 10 years, that had been established by the current Democrat Secretary of State, Joyce Benson. And they got $12 million. Well, they're they sent it to a 501c3 called the Michigan Center for Election Law and Administration. We just got a copy of their Form 990 from the IRS. And here's the punchline. That $12 million was basically all spent in 2 different groups. $11.8 million went to a Democrat media buy firm that's a subsidiary of the biggest Democrat consulting firm in the country. That the media buy firm is called Waterfront Strategies, got $9.7 million. And then Outburst Strategies, the Michigan version of that, got $2 million. And their task, interestingly enough, you know what it was?
Turn out
to
the
educate voters and get them out to vote. Now, we got that information. We have no information whatsoever on how they use that money. And it seems to me quite likely that the appearance of impropriety standard has been met for a complaint either with the IRS or the FEC, because these are Democrat firms. And the suspicion would be they sent text messages to Democrat voters to get them out. And they just might have lost all those Republican voters.
Absolutely.
That needs to be investigated.
And Mike, I want to let our viewers know that this takes digging, and our federal agencies aren't trying to dig or understand the election. In fact, they're trying to chill any review of the election. Many times, various conservative, people claim they have evidence of fraud, and they don't develop it or understand it before they trot it out before the public. But you have the discipline to come to an understanding and keep pressing forward. And as you press forward, you uncover all of the effort of the left to not allow our election to be transparent. And this was the least transparent election in U.S. history. It's amazing to me.
Not only that, Phil, in Michigan, this instance is probably the most blatant and brazen violation, in my view, of campaign election law.
Well, it's very clear why that money was given. Now, as you know, in Wisconsin, we've got and this happened in the urban core. You and I have been talking about this and following it and exposing it now for several months, and we've still got a ways to go. It's amazing how this money was used to turn election offices that are supposed to be objective, run by government, into partisan campaign centers. In Wisconsin, they're geofencing. And for our viewers, that means all the data that's flowing from your cell phone. You've got all these apps telling people where you are, what you're doing, what you're purchasing, where you've been, and they aggregate all of that data and they sell it to people who are trying to sell you things. But they also sell it to campaigns and politicians to predict your behavior so they can identify potential voters. Government did that this election to identify those who are likely to vote for Biden, and then government hired people to turn them out. And what Mike is talking about is the flow of so-called nonprofit monies. You give to a politician, you're not supposed to get a tax deduction. And the money goes through these pop-up nonprofits. In other words, they're created and they disappear, and they are used for partisan campaign purposes. That's a big story in the 2020 election, and you're helping uncover it. And I greatly appreciate that. Now, let me ask you this, Mike, because this has been dubbed the big lie, that there's nothing to look at, don't slow down, keep driving forward, keep your eye on the road, nothing to see here in 2020. Why do you believe it's important that we understand what happened in the 2020 election?
So it doesn't happen again. And so people have confidence in the electoral process. People currently, at least half the country, doesn't have confidence in the honesty and the fairness of the electoral process. We cannot have a constitutional republic continue if people don't believe that the election is free and fair. Are we Russia, or are we China, or are we the United States of America? That is the central issue that we face today. And that's why this research, to show what really happened and restore confidence in the electoral process by putting reforms in where you can track all this stuff. That's why it's so very, very important right now. There's nothing, in my view, more important to the long-term survival of our country as a constitutional republic than restoring confidence in the fairness of our electoral process.
Now, I have often described the 2020 election as the most lawless in U.S. history. What I mean by that is using COVID fear, private monies, local election officials, rather than state legislators, unilaterally defied state law in all of these cities and swing states that Zuckerberg money touched. Now, do you agree with that? Do you have the impression that this election had the least uniformity? In other words, every voter treated equally and all the laws applying equally within the state. Do you see this disparate treatment?
I think the most obvious example of that disparate treatment is the failure of many states, many states, dozens of states actually, to follow election laws passed by the state legislatures and signed by the governors into law with regards to the treatment of absentee ballots. I mean, you saw it in Georgia, where the placement of absentee ballots in drop boxes was not authorized by law in 2020, and it was only authorized by, as you pointed out, an emergency election code rule. Now, it was an emergency election code rule, meaning they didn't have to put out a lot of public notice. They had only 30 days to review it, and they kind of snuck it in, right? But it wasn't statutorily authorized. And there were, as you know, 600,000 ballots placed in Georgia in these absentee ballot drop boxes. There, to this day,
you can't get the chain of custody. Yeah.
The chain of custody documents for more than half of those absentee ballots cannot be found, won't be reported. So that's point number one.
When did you make your first demand for those documents, Mike?
December 5th of 2020. And so we asked Secretary of State Raffensperger for the documents, the chain of custody documents, tracking the movement of batches of absentee ballots from these 300 drop boxes to the local election tabulation center. And Raffensperger said, well, we don't keep track of that. And I said, really? I thought that's what the Secretary of State did. So no, you have to talk to all 159 counties. Well, we talked to all 159 counties. And, we still don't have 310,000 chain of custody documents for 310,000 absentee ballots in our possession, been now 9-10 months after the election. Unbelievable is that case.
Am I correct in my memory that Raffensperger, soon after the 2020 general election, said it was one of the safest and most fair elections in Georgia history? But due to your work, now he's saying that Fulton County ought to be placed in receivership because they ran the election so poorly.
Yeah, if Fulton County now is placed in receivership, his statement that it was the fairest and most honest election in history is obviously false and incorrect.
He's trying to run. He's trying to run to the front of your parade, I think, Mike.
Well, it would be nice if he actually gave us some of the documents we requested, because that would help, don't you think?
Yeah, but can't do that. It would be an admission that he had it the whole time and either never read them or hope nobody else would ever get them.
In Wisconsin, right, absentee ballots, the law does not allow for the placement of absentee ballots in drop boxes in Wisconsin.
Oh, what's the law? I thought Governor Evers was the law. I thought he decided every morning when the law
there says there's only two ways you can deliver an absentee ballot. You can deliver it in person, or you can put it in the U.S. mail. That's it.
And that makes sense.
The Wisconsin Election Commission, asserted authority it did not have, and said, yeah, you can put them in these drop boxes. And I think I saw a lawsuit that said there were something like 237,000 absentee ballots placed in drop boxes that shouldn't have been counted. And what's interesting about that, it's fascinating. The Wisconsin State Supreme Court did not follow the law there. They voted 4-3 that it was okay to break the law.
Yeah, they said that you couldn't verify it would change the result of the election. And that is actually true. But the problem is the laws aren't followed. There's no remedy.
It doesn't matter. What matters is that the law needs to be followed in order for people to have confidence in the process. Georgia, 13,000 votes that Biden won by. In Wisconsin, about 21,000. These hundreds of thousands of votes either cast illegally or for which there are not chain of custody documents. This is very troublesome to anybody who has common sense and honesty and integrity.
Absolutely. And in Wisconsin also, you had the voter ID issue in which those who cast their ballot absentee, Wisconsin requires identification for that. You have to have your driver's license. And they have an exception for those who are indefinitely confined. So if you're in the hospital and you can't get out, or in prison, now more and more inmates are able to vote, or something like that. But what happened is unilaterally officials said, well, COVID makes everybody indefinitely confined. And Mike, as they did that, we did a little social media search of people who voted by absentee, because everybody can get those lists as they go through. Campaigns pick them up, who's voted by absentee and so forth through the election. So we went and got them. And then we checked out social media. And a lot of those indefinitely confined were dressed up as Batman or some Marvel character on Halloween at a party just before the election. So there is just no way that election we can have faith in, because these were unilateral, localized decisions about how they were going to administer the election. And it actually redefined what type of ballot would be counted. And as you know, Zuckerberg money paid the election judges. Zuckerberg money paid for these satellite centers in Detroit and Philadelphia. Zuckerberg money paid for the people who boarded up the windows and kicked America out while the left let the billionaires in. We can't let it happen again. Now, Mike,
and that's a big problem, and why we need to be on this all the time, Phil.
Absolutely. And it's a honor to engage this effort to figure out what happened with you, sir. I butchered the name of your book at the beginning. and I apologize for that. Rules for Conservative Radicals, and you've got several other books as well. And
the one I would recommend.
Yeah.
That's a good book. The Covenant of Liberty: The Ideological Origins of the Tea Party Movement lays all this out, and probably when I get some time, I think there's a sequel to it, and we're playing right in the middle of that drama right now today, Phil.
So that's on, you can purchase it. You can go to Amazon and purchase
Amazon.
it. Mm-hmm. Covenant of Liberty and Michael
Covenant
Patrick Leahy. And Mike, plug your radio show and your Star News Network.
The Star News Network is at starnewsnetwork.com, starnewsnetwork.com. My radio show is the Tennessee Star Report with Michael Patrick Leahy. You can go to my website, michaelpatrickleahy.com, and listen to it, learn more about me.
All right, Michael, thank you for joining us. And I thank all our listeners for joining us. Michael Patrick Leahy is of the school of journalism that I remember when I first started getting engaged in politics back in 1984, 1986, very actively involved. There were people who would dig for the truth. Now, they had some cynicism. They would approach me as a party official and later as an elected official with some cynicism. They always wanted to test what I said, but it was a healthy cynicism. It wasn't pushing a narrative. It wasn't journalism at that time. And the networks did not have the belief that the American people are unable to figure out the truth. Now they believe that you're too stupid to receive information. So they have to filter, interpret it, and push it upon you. The elitists in America who are assuming authority and control over many institutions in America believe you're the problem and freedom is the problem. That we have a totalitarian elite that can best determine where you eat, who you visit, how far you stand from one another, whether your mask covers your nose and your mouth, even though they don't follow their own rules. They want you to be afraid of something of which they are not afraid, because it's more about authority and about expanding the role of government. And that's what Marxism is, assuming jurisdiction over your thoughts, over your speech, over your ability to provide for your family, and how you express yourself politically. And we're seeing that in America. This nation must take a stand. And American freedom has been protected when Americans have the courage and the conviction to protect the freedom of those with whom they disagree. That's what it's going to take, an express rejection of cancel culture. We believe in America, if somebody is stupid, guess what? We don't cancel them. Let them speak, reason against them. Win the battle of ideas, don't use power to silence and exclude people. That's the great heritage we've been gifted, the ability to see the good even within the bad. We have to stand up for each other, or they're coming for you next. This is Phil Klein. Thank you for joining me on First Principles.
Thank you so much for staying tuned for First Principles. We look forward to connecting with you again next week.